want to welcome to the show Reverend Percy McCray Jr. He has spent more than 20 years ministering to cancer patients and their caregivers at City of Hope, which is a nationwide cancer care ministry training and supporting program. You are the director of this organization, and you provide leadership to the pastoral care staff as well. So one of the things about Pastor, or actually Reverend McCray, is that he recognizes the cancer care ministry is a special calling from God for him. And he considers that faith is a key, but sometimes overlooked component of the cancer treatment. Well, welcome to the show, Reverend.
Well, thank you. It's a privilege and a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
I am very excited to talk to you. Well, I am a cancer survivor. So
congratulations.
Yes, praise God. For
Yes.
13 years now, I'm a cancer survivor. So thank God I'm on remission for 13 years. So that's a blessing, a huge blessing. But I do know the incredible importance of faith for us believers whenever we face this incredible valley of cancer. I would love for you to share a little bit about how you were called to this ministry.
Yeah, it's an interesting journey for sure. And let me also add that I am now going on my 4th year as an early colon stage cancer patient. So I am a survivor with no evidence. With no evidence of disease. So I'm doing well. So I'm a member of the club also. But to specifically answer your question, many, many years ago, I'm going on close to 3 decades now of working in this community. My most recent position is that I am the National Director of Specialized Outreach for City of Hope. But I started out as a chaplain, then I became the Director of Chaplains, and then I was promoted to the National Director of Faith-Based Services, and now I am the National Director of Specialized Outreach for City of Hope. But the way that this got started, quite frankly, is that I was freshly out of Bible college, just graduated, and with all intentions of starting my own local congregation, which I eventually did do. But before I did that, I came across an opportunity of an organization called Cancer Treatment Centers of America, which has just recently been purchased by City of Hope. And they, I knew a mutual friend of mine's, individual who worked at Cancer Treatment Centers of America, and they inquired, would I be interested in possibly being a hospital chaplain? And that was not really on my radar. Didn't really know what a hospital chaplain did, but nevertheless, had a conversation with the powers to be there, and shortly thereafter began my now 28th year journey of working with cancer patients. And so, you know, God calls you in ways sometimes that you're not aware of, and your path can take a different course sometimes. And that's what happened for me. And so here I am almost 28 years later, still working with the cancer community with regard to faith and hope and spirituality, and of course, good clinical medical care.
Well, that's a beautiful journey. And then, of course, unfortunately, because none of us want to be part of that club. You know, you had the situation where you had cancer 4 years ago while you were ministering to people. So I want to get to that because I know how much that impacts our walk and our ministry. Yes. But I would love for you to share a little bit more about City of Hope.
Sure. City of Hope just recently has been listed as one of the top cancer hospitals in the United States of America, listed by U.S. News and World Report, based out of California, Southern California, there in Duarte. Very large organization that has been around for about 100 years, has a 100-year history, serving and promoting health and wellness, democratizing cancer. One of the world-class leading facilities in research as well. So lots of good things with regard to the organization. I'm so excited to be a part and privileged to be part of the organization, but serving cancer patients now, Southern California, Chicago, Atlanta, and Phoenix, Arizona. So pretty big footprint across the United States at this point.
Absolutely. Now, it is a faith-based organization, right? From what I read.
It is not a faith-based
Okay.
organization, and I'm glad that you asked that question. It is a faith-friendly organization.
Okay.
So its original history, and I see your flag in the background, you'll appreciate this here in just a second, basically began in its early days with kind of a Jewish founders and kind of a Jewish influence with regard to the organization there in Southern California. But as a whole, again, we have spiritual care support people in all of the facilities, chaplains who provide spiritual support to any orientation of faith, anyone that has a faith background, obviously, to be amalgamated and incorporated with good clinical and medical care. And the key to it is understanding that faith for many people, not necessarily all people, but certainly many people, is very important. It matters to them. And it also provides the potential of an additional support, mental, emotional, and potentially physically. And so there's research and data that supports the principle that people who have an abiding faith or are of some sort of spiritual orientation tend to be more hopeful in many cases, tend to stay locked into their medical care plan and protocol, and tend to basically, as a result of believing in a higher power working on their behalf, believe that good things can happen in the midst of, in some cases, pretty trying circumstances. You being a cancer survivor, I being a cancer survivor, every day as a cancer patient is not always a good day. There are trials and circumstances that people have to work through and hardships. And faith can become an adjunct support that provides people with a sense of hopefulness beyond just the medicine and science of taking a tablet or getting some sort of medication. There's an internal dynamic that spirituality provides people from a spiritual perspective that allows them to be hopeful and to gain strength and to work through the challenges and rigors of being a cancer patient, as well as their caregivers.
And well, you have worked long enough with this organization to have walked along with people who are facing cancer and sometimes overwhelming circumstances. You know, when diagnosis is dire. I
Yep.
have lost friends to cancer. I have a dear friend of mine who was just given a death, you know, uh, diagnosis pretty much as her cancer does not have cure. And so you do know the difference between someone who walks with the Lord through these trials and someone who does not. Can you tell me a little bit how you equip your people, your pastors that are on your staff, to help those people who don't necessarily believe in God or who are not Christians?
It's a great question because obviously all of patients and every patient that comes to the front door is not necessarily of a spiritual orientation or a faith background, and or certainly not with regard to specific Christian, worldviews. So with that, all of the chaplains are professionally trained chaplains. They go to school to receive training on how to really support people who may not have a faith orientation. And this is a really important question. What I have learned and what my experience has taught me in close to 3 decades is that, interestingly, one of the things that can happen with a cancer diagnosis is that it can begin to stimulate and start a thought around faith and spirituality. Many, many, many patients and their caregivers who may have walked through the front doors agnostic, atheist, or just indifferent about spirituality begin to start thinking about that, particularly given the example that you just gave. And my love, support, and prayers go out to your friend that just received the recent diagnosis that you just articulated, is that at the end of the day, what cancer does for anyone who hears those words associated directly with them, it forces you to think about your mortality. It
Yes.
forces you to think about, is there a creator? What is my spiritual destiny, legacy? Is that something that I should begin to investigate and look into? And so it certainly provides opportunity for the hospital pastors and chaplains to begin to, help people walk through that query with regard to their sense of spirituality, and then from there allow that patient to dictate the terms of that conversation. I think it's very important that I clarify that at the end of the day, spiritual support is only provided to patients and their caregivers as they opt into and agree and ask for that support. So there may be individuals who may decline and say, I'm not interested in receiving that type of support, and that is honored and respected. But certainly for those who say, hey, will you come and pray with me? Or will you sit down and kind of help me talk through some things with regard to end of life challenges and schools of thought? The hospital chaplains are there to provide those services, but to respect everyone's unique spiritual orientation. And we're not there to proselytize anyone. We're there to provide support as needed and as desired. But all of the chaplains are certainly prepared to be able to help step people through the conversation of faith, spirituality, and their relationship with God.
You know, you said something, it reminded me of a saying that I heard years ago. It said that there are no atheists on deathbed, on their deathbeds, you know, and I was like, I just always wondered, because I have a brother-in-law who was a pastor, and he used to say that he has seen like a believer dying and a non-believer dying, you know, an atheist dying, and he said that there was just such a difference, right? And so that brings me to my next question to you. I imagine that this ministry to you and to the people, to the other pastors that are involved in this ministry, it has to be sometimes overwhelming to deal with so much death and so much pain, sometimes with very young patients as well. How do you deal with that personally?
Wow, there was a lot there to unpack. First of all, you're exactly right. I can certainly say with a full-throated conviction, there is definitely a difference in individuals who expire and transition from this life, who have an abiding faith in God, a hope of God, a sense of a relationship with God. There is a massive difference than those who do not experience that and have not walked that path. So you are exactly right. And it really is a game changer with regard to overall disposition, emotion, attitude, et cetera, et cetera. Then to the other point, that you're right, and I just recently am preparing a show for my podcast, Health, Hope, and Inspiration. You can see that behind me.
Yes.
And then for people who are interested, we have about 400,000 subscribers to the show. And we talk with
That's
and interview,
awesome.
yeah, we interview cancer patients and their caregivers to talk about their journey and their experience, as well as doctors and clinicians. And one of the shows that I'm preparing right now is addressing and dealing with the fact that, or answering a question with regard to, we are seeing younger people being diagnosed with cancer at a rate that we had not seen, say, 10, 20 years ago. So with that being said, you know, how do you manage and handle that? Yes, being a supporter of people with cancer certainly has its mental and emotional, stressors. And one of the things that I learned early on is that just like even being a pastor of a congregation, you have to figure out a way to balance your life where you have some time that you can step away, that you can refresh, rejuvenate, because dealing with that and supporting people with that type of chronic disease day in and day out can certainly take its toll upon you, right? And there can be I think the term clinically is called compassion fatigue, where you just become fatigued in being able to provide compassion and supporting people. So the key to it is good work-life balance, taking time off and away, doing things that will allow you to decompress from your day-to-day work of supporting cancer patients. And here's the biggest thing for those that are listening and for those who may enter into this type of ministry is being reminded constantly. And this was probably my first 2 or 3 months of lesson that I learned, that at the end of the day, I am not the healer. God is the healer. My job is to help people access the love, the faith, the hope, the forgiveness, the strength of God. But I am not required to make something happen with that individual. And believe it or not, psychologically and emotionally, that takes a lot of pressure off of anyone who is working in that type of arena, because you understand that at some point you have to walk away and you have to leave that individual into the care and the hands of our Creator. And that because you have done all that you can do, is understanding and knowing your limitations at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk a little bit about the church itself, about
Okay.
how we as believers and leaders and ministry leaders in church, what are some of the misconceptions that are taught out there
Mm.
and that we have to be so careful when we are talking to people who are facing this valley?
Yeah, this is my area here. Now we're in my wheelhouse. Learn some painful lessons with regard to engaging and interacting with local ministries, churches, faith leaders. And probably the number one misconception that still on some level takes place is associating, if you will, one's cancer and their lack of healing of cancer with regard to their faith, having lack of faith, or having sin in their life. It is the biggest defaulted position. And I understand psychologically and emotionally why, but it still is not correct, because at the end of the day, individuals are trying to come to terms with why. What happened? We prayed. We went to church. We were tithers. Whatever
Absolutely.
those tenets of faith from a Christian, being a good steward and being a good believer, right? And yet, my pastor, my mom, my husband, my wife, I mean, there's some pretty high profile people over the last 5 years in ministry, in evangelical Christianity, whose wife passed away from cancer.
Mhm.
Luis Palau, the great South American evangelist.
Absolutely. Yes.
How many people did he lead to the
Amen.
throne room of God? And yet he passed away from cancer. So
Exactly.
it
Well,
is.
just Tony Evans' wife, she just was a couple of years ago, maybe not even that. She just passed away.
Yeah, I think Dolores, his wife passed away from cancer.
Hmm.
It was very public. They talked about it openly. They sent out reports. They let people know what was going on, and then she eventually did. Dr. Tony Evans. There probably isn't anybody more beloved and respected in Christian leadership than Dr. Tony Evans.
That's right.
Charles Stanley, Dr. I mean,
Yes.
so with that being said, and yet, his precious, wonderful wife, she passed away as a
Hmm.
result of cancer. So the point to be made is, I don't think that I would dare stand before Dr. Tony Evans and tell him, well, I guess your wife didn't have enough faith, or I guess you didn't have enough faith, because you're the man of God. How come you just didn't lay your hands on her and she didn't get healed?
Exactly.
I don't think anyone would dare do that or think that. And yet, there are people who, from time to time, go there in their thought process and in their
Mhm.
theology to try to associate the two together to try to answer a very difficult question. So that's the number one misconception, is that people died or received cancer because of a lack of faith, or that there was sin in their life. And I
Mhm.
think that we need to uh, respectfully and lovingly correct the local faith community and not doing that, and don't go there. It's so disingenuous, particularly for loved ones who are left behind, that we're praying and being very vigilant. I'm thinking of another very, 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 very high profile international minister, and his son-in-law died of throat cancer. And I remember walking into his room, and he was a massive believer. He had a major ministry, and he died from throat cancer. And so the point simply to be made is, we need to be very careful, and we need to steer away from associating a diagnosis of cancer, and certainly a passing away of cancer, with sin or lack of faith in one's life.
That is very, very important. We have that. I mean, this issues with health is just one issue that this prosperity gospel tendency it's like a cancer really to the church,
It
because
is.
because it's just not the gospel. No, Jesus said that in this world you will have troubles, right? But I overcame the world. But take heart, because I overcame the world. So he prepared us. I mean, he went to the cross to be able to bring redemption. I mean, if so he was a man of sorrows, right? Like he's portrayed in Isaiah as the man of sorrows.
Yeah, so we have to
So
be balanced with the gospel. We can't be lopsided left or right? And what about the man that was born blind from birth? And the disciples asked Jesus, who sinned here? And his
Yes.
answer is astonishing if you just read it. He said, no one sinned here, that this was
Mhm.
allowed to happen so that the works of God can be exemplified. So
Yes.
it's a tough theological thing to work through, but
Yes.
that is what our Bible teaches us. So we need to be very careful and balanced. You're absolutely right.
Yes, absolutely. And okay, so I love that you just finished this segment on that note of, that example of the blind man, that Jesus said that it was so that the glory of God would be manifested, would be shown in him. There is that now. What, with that said, I know because I've walked the valley and you did too. What
Yes.
are the blessings of cancer,
Oh,
Pastor, if we just have the right
oh,
perspective?
oh, this was my education outside of my formal ministerial education. I was not taught this in Bible college. I didn't hear any of these theological schools of thought, but this is what I've learned in almost 30 years. There can be, and I know for people who may be hearing this, who may be initially just being diagnosed or have just entered into this arena, I know that psychologically and intellectually, this is going to be hard to kind of wrap your head around. But I say to you respectfully to consider some of the things, and I've written a resource about this, and you can go to healthhopeandinspiration.com. It's a free downloadable resource. I have about 60 of them that talks about different topics, and this is one of them. What can I learn from cancer? How can I serve God with cancer? First of all, can I? And the absolute answer is yes. Can I learn something from cancer and a journey of cancer? Absolutely. First and foremost, I cannot tell you how many people, hundreds, thousands of them, have found renewed purpose as a result of being a cancer patient. That they stepped through that process, they struggled, they went through the different highs and lows, they had tough days, tough weeks, etc. But somehow when they were able to step through and get on the other side of that experience, they would emerge with this renewed sense of, first of all, I'm not going to waste this experience just to be healthy and to be healed. I need to do something. I need to give back. I need to glorify God and I need to bless people with what I've been through. And I have seen hundreds, thousands of people who have written books, started foundations, done,
I'm one.
yeah, and I could go on and on and on. There's a couple in Hawaii that they started their own cancer care ministry, and they went out and they got partnerships with the local cement companies that they would put, that would allow them to advertise on the cement trucks about the hope of God, the faith of God having cancer. And how many people on the islands of Hawaii have they blessed and touched and fed, and on and on and on and on and on. So to answer the question succinctly is renewed purpose.
Absolutely.
Renewed purpose that maybe you didn't even know that you had, you never even considered or thought about. Second thing that can come out of a cancer diagnosis is that people walk away with being more empathetic and being more sensitive to the hurting needs of people around them. Because
Mhm.
let's face it, for most of us, before we're dealing with a major health challenge, we're just skipping along and life is just hunky-dory. And then all of a sudden, life is interrupted, life happens. And sometimes, as I've heard many cancer patients say, I took life for granted. I took my wife for granted. I took my husband for granted. I took my children for granted. And as a result, I now have become a more loving, compassionate, empathetic husband, worker, global citizen at large. And so, and then the last thing, and it's obvious, but it's very important. How many people have I had the privilege of ministering to who basically have renewed their relationship with God as a result of a diagnosis of cancer? I'm thinking of a gentleman who was estranged from his children, 3 sons. He was in a motorcycle club, very famous motorcycle club that we hear about on TV all the time. And he lived the lifestyle that was depicted with that motorcycle club. Was diagnosed with cancer, came to one of our worship services, accepted God, asked him to forgive him of his sins in the hospital, not at a local church. He dared not go to a local church. Received the good news of the saving grace of God inside of a cancer hospital, and then went out and mended his relationships with his 3 sons. And after his 3rd son finally responded to him after multiple attempts. Probably 2 months later, he passed away. But before he did, he said, if God doesn't do anything else for him, if God doesn't give him anything else, he said, I just want to be reunited with my children and I want them to forgive me. That's a blessing. And I know we focus on the cancer part, but what about those 3 children that he had a broken relationship with, that he mended that fence? They now are whole. They are better people because of his cancer experience. Those are some things for us to put into perspective and to consider.
Absolutely. And Reverend, when we talk about cancer, for instance, of course, we're talking about 2 very different views. Somebody who, knows that God has saved them, has a purpose for their lives, even though they may feel defeated or heartbroken and feel even their faith being shaken during a situation like cancer or something hard like that. But they have a very different perspective from someone who doesn't know God, doesn't know,
Right.
all of a sudden life stops, right? And it's like, I remember when tragedy happened with our family, and our brother-in-law died in a plane crash.
Mm.
We used to say it's weird that everybody else's life is going on, and I think it's anytime the tragedy strikes, you have the sense of like, why are people laughing, why are people enjoying life still? So we have like these 2 very different perspectives of everybody who, if we know the Lord, we have that time of
Right.
mourning,
Right.
but we don't stay in a mournful situation. So I want you to talk to someone out there who is, either they have received a cancer diagnosis and they do know the Lord. So most of my listeners are believers.
Okay.
So, but they are feeling extremely defeated. It's hard for them to see what the
Yep.
next steps are. Talk to them from a faith perspective on how you see that this journey can bring them to a new understanding of God and of the people around them.
Well, yeah, you teed that up well, and that's a very common scenario. As I often tell people, even though we're people of faith, when you hear the words, first of all, that you have cancer, you've got to let that wash over you, and it takes a minute to process and digest that. Even the most ardent of believers. So the point that I make here is that for those that are listening, you may not be standing on the mountaintop with your cape on today, flowing in the wind, faith man or faith woman, and you may be feeling like you're in the valley, you're struggling. I want to remind you today, even Superman had kryptonite. There he had moments where he had to kind of regroup and replenish and come to terms with who he was, despite all of his wonderful powers that he had, that there were moments that he had to work through. And the same is true for you and I as a believer. Number one, cancer is indiscriminate. It discriminates against no one. And so that first and foremost, cancer is not your fault. I'm gonna say it again. Cancer is not your fault. As soon as you're able to walk past that hurdle, the first thing that you can do is get the enemy out of your head and out of your heart, because it is going to be impossible to fight and or beat a foe that you believe is your fault for fighting. Number one. So you do not deserve cancer. Cancer is not your fault. And therefore, with that being said, you are not being judged by God because of cancer. Cancer is not a judgment of the Lord. Another big misnomer that is made by believers. So once we can get that cleared off of the highway, now we have a pathway that we can begin to travel. And that path is going to be days of highs and lows. And so I want to remind you of the Apostle Paul, who said that I have learned. Now, this is the guy that wrote 3/4 of the New Testament, who raised a man from the dead, who got bitten by a snake, who was shipwrecked. Paul did a few things with the power of God in his life. And he said, I've learned that whatever state that I am in, whatever condition that I'm in, I've learned to work through that. I've learned to become circumspect, because when I am weak, then am I strong, because the power, not of you, not of your doctor, not even of your medical community, but the power of God now rests upon you in your weakness, in your low moments. When you are feeling your absolute worst, that is when God is working in his absolute best in your life. If you can simply hang on and move from one day to the next, this is a marathon. It is not a sprint. Don't try to win this race in a week. For many cancer patients, it is going to take a while, weeks, months, maybe even years to work through the process. But know at the end of the day that all things work together for the good of them
That's right.
who love God and are the called according to his purpose. Romans 8:28. There is something good that can happen from this experience. You can be blessed and can be a blessing, and you will begin to understand the depth, the width, the breadth, and the scope of the love of God that's within you. And there is no class that can teach us that. We only learn that in the valley as we are walking through the shadow of death.
Hallelujah. We're having church right now. So I'm here. I'm just bouncing inside because you just filled this show right now with so much truth that only those who have gone through this valley and are on the other side or are going through this valley and are
Right.
finding that hope, are finding that peace, are finding that the peace that surpasses all understanding.
Yes.
Now that you can only find it. And people who don't know the Lord, they don't understand. They think we're crazy, really, most of the time.
They do.
They do. And it's like we don't, it is something that nobody can understand unless you really have gone through that. And you said something that it's so true. My first book that I wrote, 12 inches, it couldn't have been written were it not for the deep valleys that I have crossed, and cancer was one of them.
Yeah.
And I have been able to minister to so many people, that have gone through different difficult valleys, because I went through them, and I know the love of God, and I know the peace that surpasses understanding, and I can point to others and say, you still can have an abundant life. Now, that does not mean that you're not going to feel defeated.
Nope.
That does not mean that there are not days when you are like, you feel hopeless, that you feel scared. All of those very human emotions, they are going to be there through the journey, but we do not need to stay there, right? We have a God that can pick us back up and turn us around and put us our feet on solid ground.
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, to your point, you cannot, and I know many people have heard this expression, it's pretty old now. You really don't qualify for a testimony until you've been through a test. And you cannot have a message, not a real message, not one that comes from deep within unless you've been through some mess. Messages and tests come from real scenarios and situations. There was an old lady that grew up in my church, and in her Bible, she would have T and P written next to certain scriptures. And so one day I asked her, I said, why do you have T and P written by all of these scriptures? She said, because these are all scenarios that have been tried and proven in my life.
I have that too in my Bible. Tea and peace everywhere.
Been there, done that, and got the t-shirt to prove it.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, this is wonderful. Reverend, talk to someone out there from me that, we're going to have, I'm sure people who are going through cancer, had gone through cancer will listen. But everybody is impacted by cancer nowadays. We have a friend, we have a family member, or someone. Give them some resources, and I know, I would love for you to talk to them about your new podcast. Or I don't know if it's new, but evidently 400,000 is not that new. But I would love for you to talk a little bit about your podcast, but other resources where people can go and find hope and find, what they need to really walk this road, whether they are helping someone or they're doing that on themselves. So would you please share that?
So I'm gonna give you 4 different resources, 2 that are kind of secular and 2 that are very faith-driven. The first resource that I want to recommend is a resource called Our Journey of Hope. When you type into the web browser, it's all one word. It can be all lowercase, not case sensitive. Our, not yours, not they, ourjourneyofhope.com.
Okay.
Ourjourneyofhope.com is a faith spiritual-based website, and it is a training a website for free cancer care leadership training to anyone in the faith community who feels that they want to serve and better help cancer patients. And this is all free of charge. I started this program 20 years ago, and we have now probably close to 4,000 churches worldwide that has gone through this training. So you don't have to be a pastor, but if you belong to a faith community, you can sign up and you can take this training. It's free. But if you're not interested in the training, because we thought about people who said, well, I don't want to be trained to do cancer care ministry. We also have a section on that website that provides faith leaders and lay people access to resources, documents that you can download that talks about cancer, that provides hope, that gives you some things to think about and work with and begin to possibly take back and implement into your local congregation. So that is on ourjourneyofhope.com. The second big resource is my podcast. So with that, I'm gonna step to the side so people can see health, hope, and inspiration. This has been a labor of love, close to 400,000 weekly subscribers. And we have well over 50, 60 free downloadable digital resources. Children whose parents have cancer, the cost of cancer care, what happens when my faith is challenged, God can use doctors. There's a plethora of resources and topics that anyone can download and share with family or friends, all free of charge. All you have to do is provide your first, last name, and your email address. You'll be subscribed to the show. We want you to subscribe to the show. Yes. We've won an award for one of the best podcasts in this space about 5 years ago at the National Religious Broadcasters Conference. I couldn't believe it when we were
incredible.
Honored. It was incredible. It truly was. And this show is designed to hear the stories, real life stories of cancer patients, their caregivers, doctors, clinicians, anyone that could speak to the conversation of cancer. And then we merge any type of faith-related spiritual component based upon that person's vantage point into that conversation. And so that can be located and accessed on health, hope, and inspiration.com, just like the title of the show. And you can access that today, tomorrow, share it with your family and friends as we continue to speak to and hear from the faith community as they tell their stories. Because I got news for you. There's a lot of cancer patients who'd like to talk about their story, but they can't find anyone to listen because people are afraid of the conversation. So we built a platform just for that reason, to give them the ability to share the good, the bad, and all that went into their experience and how people can be encouraged and inspired to move forward. Health, Hope, and Inspiration.com. The second two is the National Cancer Institute. National Cancer Institute, NCI.com. And then also the American Cancer Society. These are two reputable websites that can provide you with data, with research, statistics. They can give you information broken down by your state with regard to anything and everything related to cancer that has some type of clinical data test or speaking points, so that it's not just, as you know, the internet can be a place of good information and in many cases bad information.
Bad information.
Yeah, so these are two reputable cancer organizations that can answer questions about treatment, terminology, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. National Cancer Institute, NCI.com, and the American Cancer Society.com. Those are two of the most reputable cancer sites that can give you data, information, and research that'll help you answer questions and begin to start working you through the process of a cancer conversation today.
Absolutely, absolutely. They are great resources. And of course, depending on the type of cancer, that are also specific. My case, I had kidney cancer. So, you can research, and there are also organizations where it's very directed to your type of cancer or your loved one's type of cancer. So
male, female, children, so they break it all out into all of those categories. That's correct.
I will tell you, we'll leave it at time. that you only don't know if you don't look for things, right? It's just there's so much out there, and I think that that is a great thing. Not you are not alone, right? If
No,
you're going through cancer, you are not alone,
no,
and it's like Reverend said, you it's not your fault. You are not alone. There are so many
no.
people out there who are going through what you're going through and they want to help. And so I just absolutely love this conversation. This is
Oh,
so much great information. And I will put all this information on my show notes. And I will write also a column for the Atlanta Journal Constitution with because this is such an important topic. And I know it's going to bless many of the readers of in Georgia and beyond. So I am so happy to have met you, Pastor, and it's a
oh.
blessing to talk to you.
Well, thank you. One other resource that just popped in my head, there's so many.
Yes.
Dave Dravecki, Drevecky, Dave Dravecki Ministries. He
Okay.
is a former professional baseball player who had
Yes.
cancer in his shoulder, had his cancer surgically removed, came back and pitched, and his arm snapped off while he was pitching. So he had his arm amputated, but he has been living now 30 years, 20 years. He and his wife started a online cancer care ministry support group, but they have resources. They have information that will bless your life, that will inspire cancer patients, and it's all written from a Christian vantage point, from a spiritual care perspective. DaveDraveckyMinistries.com.
That's incredible. I will put that on my show notes as well. This is so good. So much good information and so much encouragement for people who are going through that or who have loved ones who are going through this horrible disease. There's hope, there's health, and there's inspiration for
Yes.
you to. So this is wonderful. Such a blessing to talk to you, Reverend.
Well,
It
thank
was
you.
really, really a blessing to meet you. Thank you so much for
Well,
your time.
Well, thank you and for your work, your ministry, and all that you are doing. Prayers for your family, your dear friend, and most importantly, to you that are listening today. Remember that we've got work to do, so let's keep chopping the wood. The best potentially is still yet to come in your life. God bless.
God bless. I love that. Thank you, Pastor.
All right, thank you.